The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call Moana Maki.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is a part of urgency where we pretend that a bill has just been to a select committee, because normally we'd be doing the second reading speech after a select committee had been given the opportunity to actually scrutinise a bill, to make sure that it does what the government intends it to do, to make sure there aren't any unintended consequences. And instead, here we are giving second reading speeches a matter of about 30 or 40 minutes after we gave the first reading speech. And unfortunately, such is the way with this government. They don't really care about the unintended consequences. All they know is that this is the only plan they have, this and asset sales and pokey machines. That's it for the economy. If this doesn't work, they're kind of screwed. They're kind of screwed. So they are going to do anything they can to grease the wheels, to do everything possible to make sure this stuff happens, regardless of the risks to the environment. Regardless of the risks to the environment. Because they don't have a plan B. And they talk about jobs. Do they realise there are actually other industries in New Zealand that create jobs that are desperate for government assistance, like, say, the manufacturing industry, like, say, the clean tech and renewable energy sectors? There are actually other industries that could be used to create jobs. And I want to comment on what Mark Mitchell said and also Jonathan Young said when they talked about Taranaki and how great this industry has been for Taranaki. You do realise that happened under the existing regime. All that development happened under legislation which actually provided adequate environmental protection. It doesn't need this shabby, weak legislation in order for it to go ahead. If the existing legislation was so difficult that the oil and gas industry would never be able to operate, then how did Taranaki happen in the first place, Mr Young? I look forward to your speech answering that question, just like you answered all the other questions. Because the reality is, it can go ahead under the legislation that's already there. Mr Young knows it. It's just that they want to make sure that stuff that perhaps might not have got through that legislation, because it is too risky, it does, on that balance, it is too environmentally risky, health and safety risky. They're quite happy for that stuff to go ahead, because this is the only plan they've got. And that's the sad reality of what we're passing in the House today. And as I said in my first reading speech, the body is not even cold yet on the bill that we originally passed 3 weeks ago, and we're here having to clean up the mess that the Minister made and fix all the mistakes he made in that piece of legislation. And one of the things the Minister is doing in this piece of legislation, and he's pretending that he meant to do it the first time around, but apparently he just accidentally left out 1.7 million square kilometres of water in the original bill, and that's a minor technical amendment to make sure it's included in this one. Well, the Minister likes to say that it's about health and safety. It's about health and safety, ensuring safety on the high seas. Well, if that's the case, I asked this question all through the debate on the original bill, and I would like an answer, please, from the Minister or anyone else. If safety is the issue, then why does it not cover every vessel? Why is it only vessels that are protesting, and then only vessels that are protesting oil and gas? If it's about safety, then surely that should apply to every vessel. In which case, instead of this bill, or maybe as well as this bill, why didn't we have a bill extending the Maritime Transport Act and the Crimes Act, which is what deals with the issue of dangerous behaviour in our territorial waters, into the exclusive economic zone and maybe even the continental shelf, even though there are questions about our ability to do that? Why do we not have a bill in the urgency motion simply doing that? And I want to put on record my disappointment at industry and how they've responded to this particular clause. And I was really disappointed to see PEPANS come out in support of it, because I've got a lot of time for PEPANS. They're engaging, they're representing their industry, good on them. I was really disappointed to see them come out and support this, rather than saying, we think that the existing regime and the territorial waters should be extended out so that everyone is subject to the same standards of behaviour, and we're not just targeting one group. That would have been a good response from industry, to say, yes, we want this dealt with, because it does need to be dealt with, but we want it to apply to everyone, not just to apply to only protest vessels against deep-sea drilling. That would have been a good response from PEPANS, and I have to put on record my disappointment at the position that they took over that. But I want to thank Dennis, who Facebooked me since my first reading speech, to point out something that I hadn't picked up on, which was in fact another change. It isn't just extending it into the continental shelf. This now applies the same targeted regime in our territorial waters. In our territorial waters, which is not all actually above the continental shelf. So this takes this protest ban right up to the beaches in New Zealand, and that wasn't the case under the amendment that we passed 3 weeks ago. So I want to thank Dennis for Facebooking me to point out that I'd missed that, because that is a very good point. This doesn't just extend it further out into the high seas, this actually extends it right up to the beaches, and that simply is appalling. Not only that, what it means, Mr. Speaker, is in our territorial waters above the continental shelf, we now have 2 regimes in place. Which one are the police going to prosecute under? Are they going to prosecute under the Maritime Transport Act and the Crimes Act, which is what is currently the position? Or are they going to prosecute under this new law that we're bringing in, which just targets protest vessels? Which one? Which one are police going to use? That is just the most ridiculous situation to find ourselves in. And the final point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, is that no member on that side of the House, no minister, no National Party member who's spoken. I'm glad Tohanari's here, because he'll be able to inject a bit of clarity into the debate, maybe answer these questions that his colleagues are refusing to answer, which is that on the MFAT website it makes it quite clear that the column of water above the continental shelf, that New Zealand has no rights to legislate in there. We don't have any rights to manage the fisheries, and they actually say we don't have any rights to manage any activities such as shipping. So if we are not allowed legally, and I'm glad that Mr. Tim Grosser is in the House, because he's an international expert. He operates at the highest levels of international negotiations. This is a man who knows what he's talking about, and we're so grateful to have this visiting international expert in the House tonight. And I would hope that he would take a call. I am being very kind, that's in all sincerity. And I would hope that he would use, well, it's like, Mr. Grosser, it's your own members who are laughing, assuming that I'm joking. I'm not actually joking. I would hope that Mr. Grosser would be able to provide some clarity, because what we're being told by MFAT, Mr. Grosser, is that in fact we don't have any right to legislate this way above the continent, in the waters above the continental shelf. And if we can't legislate to control shipping activities, how is it that apparently we're allowed to legislate to control shipping activities that are protesting? I really look forward to an answer to that question, because this is a serious issue for New Zealand's reputation. I mean, we're going to look like idiots if we start passing laws in parts of the world that we don't have any right to pass laws in. That is embarrassing. And then we will be back here in another few weeks passing the 3rd Crown Minerals Amendment Act Bill in order to fix up all the mistakes from the last Crown Minerals Amendment Bill. I mean, it just gets to be farcical, Mr. Speaker. And this is why bills like this need to go to Select Committee. Because Mr. Lotowainga might not think that that's a serious question to know whether or not we're actually overstepping our jurisdiction as a parliament in passing laws that actually might not be legally enforceable and might make us look completely idiotic on the world stage. But on this side of the House, we take those things very seriously. Mr. Lotowainga might think that it's okay to have 2 completely separate regimes in place in our territorial waters so that police won't know which one they're meant to apply when dealing with a complaint. In fact, maybe he could tell me now, which one would it be? Will it be the Maritime Transport Act, or will it be this bill?
Tell us about the law.
Nod and smile, Mr. Lotowainga, nod and smile. That's right. That's right. That's the National Party approach to everything. Smile and wave, nod and smile. This is an utter mess. It really is. And the more you look into it, the more you peel back the layers, the worse it is, Mr. Speaker. And what makes this even worse is that the reasons we're doing this aren't laudable at all. They're not because the government wants to see safety and good practice. That's not why we're passing this. We're passing this because there is a current permit that the government is considering between a Chinese company and Shell, which is over the continental shelf between New Zealand and New Caledonia. That's why we're passing this. And I'd like the next National Party Speaker to assure me that a deal wasn't done with those groups, that this isn't being done because they asked for it in return. And, well, you have to say it's a hell of a coincidence, Mr. Burrows, that here we are passing a bill to ban protesting on the continental shelf, which we don't even have the power to do, right at the time when we have our first permit for prospecting in the continental shelf. That's a hell of a coincidence, Mr. Burrows. I'm afraid I'm a lot more cynical than you are. I'm afraid that I believe where there's smoke, there's fire, and in this case, I definitely think it is not a coincidence. So the sad thing is we're doing this because the government has no plan B, and they want to make sure their plan A goes ahead no matter what the risks.
Mr. Speaker.
I call Jonathan Young.
Mr. Speaker, the previous Speaker, Moana Maki,